Hi there. Today I'll be presenting an analysis on the Clarkdale Employee Handbook pertaining to two specific sections. This was in partnership with Project Cities and the town of Clarkdale. My name is Sasha Thomas. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student here at Arizona State University. So let's get right into it. Today's agenda will be pretty short. We're just going to look at my policy sections, research questions, go into my findings and case analysis, go into recommendations, and then a proposed implementation plan. The policy sections that I looked into reviewed two specific sections. Section 23, which was computer, social media, and email policy, and Section 26, which was confidentiality and confidential information. The sections in review are vital to creating transparent expectations between employee and employer and documenting new policy change that is adapted in technological change as well as societal change. This project focused on two main research questions pertaining to the adaptation and review of the town's current employee handbook. The first research question was, how can the town of Clarkdale's employee handbook better serve the purpose of transparency and accessibility for all employees? When we look at transparency and accessibility, this looks back to the idea of e-governance in public administration and public policy. The need for employee manager transparency is key to developing a robust workforce. As governments continue to provide transparency through materials such as employee handbooks and human resource training, there's an expectation of a clear process-based trust through accessibility and responsiveness of all parties. An adaptation of both process-based and institutional-based trust comes in the form of creating accessible spaces, currently through an updated employee procedures, policies, and trainings. Employee handbooks have a clear directive to create efficiency through information and engagement through effective communication. Put simply, the employee handbook stands as the first method to resolving questions, concerns, and general information. As a result of consistent and clear review of employee expectations and employee handbook changes comes the clear transparency of local governments to create process-based and institutional-based trust. Research question 2 looked at how does the town of Clarkdale's employee handbook compare to similar towns regarding social media, email policy, confidentiality policy as well. The qualitative research approach of this case study captured the contrasting efforts from towns and cities to thoroughly analyze updated policy used in practice at local government levels. Throughout this research, the town of Marana, the city of Cottonwood, and the town of Oro Valley will be used as key cases in contrast to the town of Clarkdale's employee handbook. So we're going to get right into it, looking at Section 23, which was computer, social media, and email policy. Marana treats the use of communication systems and equipment differently than social media policy. Marana created definitions of permitted and prohibited use of electronic storage and communication systems through explicit language that guides readers step by step. There are sections for departments affected, references for public employee record laws, definitions, policies and procedures, employee requirements, confidentiality policy. This is interesting to note because confidentiality policy was integrated within this section. As a result of clear communication and transparent information at an institutional level within the Human Resources Department, it is achieved. Oro Valley's employee handbook and personnel policy were the most successful within this case study. Oro Valley's use of public use data and streamlining the access of information in the employee handbook was integral to the research collected. Computer usage was defined as equipment, and social media policy was separated from that. There was streamlined access, as mentioned, and something to note was public records, retention, and storage were integrated within this. Definitions and reference sections were included to better create accessibility to both employers and employees. Cottonwood's manual was updated as of 2008, so keep that with a grain of salt. The city's section on computer use is separated from the town section on internet and email use. This is used as a method to create a divide between the computer policy being treated as equipment policy and social media and email policy as a software and online facilities monitoring. This method of separating the two policies in a clear directive creates transparency between employer and employee. Additionally, the definitive separation of sections speaks to cybersecurity on devices pertaining to the employee's discretion. While the City of Cottonwood's handbook is pretty outdated, I do believe that there is transparency of information to create institutional-based trust, which is paramount to employer-employee relations. In all, the City of Cottonwoods effectively delivers employee policy and procedures through the practice of defining expectations and differentiating practices. Now on to the case analysis of Section 26, which was confidentiality and confidential information. As previously discussed, the confidentiality sections of Marana's employee handbook are integrated within the use of communications and equipment policy. The purpose of integrating the confidentiality policy within the use of communications and equipment policy is to better inform employees of expectations at hand. This section clearly demonstrates the expectation of no privacy while also detailing permitted and prohibited uses of equipment and communication methods. This framework for applying confidentiality policy within an employee handbook promotes transparency and accessibility to information for all parties involved. Next, the Town of Oro Valley's confidentiality policy is not clearly defined as its own section within the personnel policy. Similar to the Town of Cottonwood, which we will get to, confidentiality policy is mentioned within subsections that pertain to the specific topic. Characteristically of Oro Valley's personnel policy is the subject of public records, retention of records, disposition of public records. This is an extension to what we see in the current Clarkdale handbook, which is awesome. In terms of transparency, Oro Valley provides clear access to personnel policy through the use of that public use database. Lastly, the City of Cottonwood's confidentiality policy differs from other towns in the aspect that each confidentiality policy is integrated within subsections. Subsections like the ethics section of employees, which covers numerous different aspects of confidentiality and the use of equipment. This framework is non-traditional, but this specific section was recently reviewed as of 2021. On to my recommendations. Recommendations for Section 23. I think creating two new sections, communication systems, which would follow email, social media, and phone use, and then creating a separate section pertaining to equipment policy, which would be computer and internet. I think this has shifted with the era of teleworking, but also in our new technological change, there is much more room to develop and grow. A definition section would allow for all parties to communicate specifics clearly and effectively. Reference sections, which would also be a great addition, are in compliance with NLRB standards. This would mirror policy content to Oro Valley's and Marana's section, and this could address any transparency concerns that you may have within the Clarkdale's current handbook. Lastly, a social media section of the Clarkdale handbook are due for review and due to some outdated practices. So social media representation by the town should be clearly outlined as a proposed for social media presence through all platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Yelp, and so forth. In sum, adjusting that content, creating new sections, and clearly defining that verbiage and expectation will mirror like cities examined through this research. Now for my recommendations on to Section 26. I think clearly communicating by that NLRB standards, which looks at requirements, defining confidential information, publishing and disclosure information. Those are all things that should be seen in every section that discusses confidentiality. Creating permitted and prohibited use sections that clearly define to employees would be a great use of this section, as it would create accessibility and transparency once again to the relationship between employers and employees. Definitions and references are also another addition that would be great for this section, as sometimes it could get confusing for employees, and that transmission of information would be extremely helpful. As discussed in the literature and in my research findings, to better ensure institutional-based and process-based trust, there has to be an effort by localities to create accessible and transparent information. I think the way to be able to do this is creating that public use database where all of the public use HR records could be put on there. This would not only propose better implementation of policy sections, but also adjust for new measures that may come up in the future. Through the implementation of these adjustments to policy content and policy sections, employees will be provided with clear expectations, promoting both institutional-based and process-based trust. So let's go to my proposed implementation plan. This will be quick, it'll wrap up the ideas, and then we'll get onto our live Q&A. Firstly, addressing concerns within policy sections introduced in both Section 23 and Section 26. Take what you will from it, it's all recommendations. Number 2, rewrite and apply these through the reference of other towns' handbooks. I recommend Marana, Oro Valley, potentially Cottonwood, but Marana and Oro Valley definitely had some great content. Per NLRB standards, a thorough legal review would be the third step, where multiple legal opinions will ensure proper dissemination of information. Fourth, I really recommend this one, establish and publish a public use database. This will not only create more transparency and accessibility, but I believe that this will create a proponent for future job seekers to look at transparent information, and that is a great marketing source. With that being said, that was my implementation plan and the conclusion of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns or anything you would like to elaborate on. I appreciate your time. Thanks.